Tonight's discussion is called Stop the Gossip, and we're going to be talking about why society today has the natural burning urge and desire to gossip, to yenta, to schmooze, to schmooze. There's 100 different terms, but ultimately it's something that we do almost without thought, and at the same time something that is not just detrimental but catastrophic. It literally kills people. So we'll start with a story about someone who took a vow of silence. It was a guy who joins a monastery, and here in the monastery they were encouraged not to talk very much. However, each person, each individual in the monastery was allowed to say 2 words every 7 years. So the guy joins the monastery, he starts his service, his vow of silence. 7 years go by. The priests in charge bring him out. He looks at them and he says, "Cold floors." They hear him, they take him back into the monastery. Another 7 years of silence, they bring him out, and he says, "Bad food." Back he goes, and another 7 years pass. He comes out again, and finally, so we're at 21 years already, and he says, "I quit." And the nuns look at each other and say, "Well, that wasn't a shock. You've only been complaining since you've got here." Speech is very profound. What we say really does make a big impact, not only for ourselves, and it's not only a reflection of who we are, but it also impacts the people that we talk to and that we communicate with. And people use speech in many different capacities. There are presidents that have been known for their great oratory skills. There are presidents that have been known for saying almost nothing. Calvin Coolidge, who was the 30th president of the United States, was a man that said almost nothing. Very, 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 very little. He would give addresses that lasted 2 minutes. At one point in time, he was once asked by his wife, after a church service, what the priest had talked about, and he said, "Sin." and when she asked him, "Well, what did he say about sin?" President Coolidge responded, "He was against it." So this is truly a man of few words. And maybe it was because he was enlightened and realized that words matter and have meaning and therefore should be weighted before they are distributed freely amongst the people. And that's what happens once you say something. It's distributed freely. It leaves our control, leaves our domain, and we're no longer capable of taming it, focusing it, controlling it in any way, shape, or form. This is the way we have to look at speech in general. Anything we say, we really have to think twice before we say it. How much more so when we're dealing with words that are harmful? To understand the scope and severity,
Do you include, with today's technology, texting, social networks, is that all included in what we're calling speech today?
I would say so. I think it's any form of communication. In biblical times, that was pretty much the only form of communication. But I would say that it probably extends to text messaging and emailing and posting on social networking and all of that. So absolutely. So to understand the severity of what we say, how we say it, and especially of slander and gossip, we're going to look at an example that's discussed in the Torah in the portion of this week. And it deals with the laws of leprosy. Leprosy is commonly believed to be nothing more than a skin condition. Even though today lepers are few and far between, there are still a community of lepers. They do exist in rare and extreme cases. And they are still shunned by society much the way they were in biblical times. But the Torah does not see leprosy as a random medical condition. It is something that happens to a specific group of people for a specific reason. Leprosy is defined by white patches on the skin. Sometimes that includes hair, sometimes it doesn't. But those blemishes were not only found in biblical times on people's skin, they were also found on clothing, on homes. So it was an expression that essentially may have started with the person, but extended to anything that was within their domain. The Torah says that leprosy is not a condition in and of itself, but rather a symptom of a greater, more profound underlying condition. And that underlying condition ultimately expresses itself in this form of leprosy. What is that condition? What is it that a person does that ultimately leads them to develop such a rare and impactful condition? Impactful because most diseases that people developed or conditions, they were treated amongst their people, amongst society, but leprosy is different. When you get leprosy, you are ostracized from the community. Today it's true, and even then you were sent outside of all three camps. The Jewish people camped in a group of three with the temple in the middle, the Levites and priests around it, and then the rest of the Jewish people. You were sent all the way out. And this is a large camp. We're talking about over 1 million people. This is a big group of people. It's a trip. They get all the way outside the camp, and you really feel left alone. So what is it that leprosy warrants such an extreme position, literally pushing someone outside of the camp of the Jewish people? So the commentaries explain, and the rabbis deduce from the stories that are told in the Torah, that leprosy was punishment for speaking falsely about other people. And some of the examples that are brought are from Moses himself, when he expressed doubt about the Jewish people listening to God. He spoke slanderous about the Jewish people. He put his hand in his pocket, pulled it out, and behold, he had leprosy. That actually comes from the story of the burning bush. Because when God shows up at the burning bush, Moses' initial reaction is, you know, I don't really trust these guys. I don't think they're going to listen to me. I don't think they're going to listen to you. That was slander. He received leprosy. Miriam, his sister, had a similar instance. After Moses received the 10 Commandments and did not spend so much time with his wife, she spoke ill and harshly of Moses. She was punished with leprosy. And in fact, the Jewish people, the entire camp, waited for her until she rejoined the people, which was tremendous respect because of who she was. So the term that is used for someone who speaks slanderous or someone that develops this leprosy is a mitzorah. And that word, mitzorah, can be broken up into two words, motzi, shemra, which means to bring about evil name upon another individual. So we see right away that there is a strong internal connection between the way we speak, slanderous and gossip talk, and developing leprosy, which naturally you wouldn't necessarily see a condition that it touches our physical body, that touches our skin, should be so intimately connected with something that we say. One is more internal and one is more external. And yet the Torah tells us that one directly affects and influences the other. So to understand how these are connected, you have to understand the severity of talking badly about other people. Because, frankly, I don't think that people today really understand how bad it is and how much harm their words can do. And we're not necessarily talking about people that are truly malicious, that want to take someone down or take someone out. We're talking, for the most part, about people that know some information and see a sense of excitement in sharing something that isn't commonly known to the world. Because that's where most people are. Most people are not mean or ill-spirited or evil, God forbid. Most people are simply looking to have a good time, and with that process, they share and divulge information, true or not, that is ultimately harmful and hurtful. So Maimonides says, straight up, the Rambam writes, Maimonides says that there are 3 sins for which retribution is exacted from a person in this world, and they are denied a portion in the world to come. So they get punished twice, here and in the world to come. What are those? Idol worship, illicit relationships, that means sleeping with someone you're not supposed to, bloodshed, taking a life, and evil speech is equivalent to all of them. Right up there. We know those are the big three, if you want to borrow a term, the cardinal sins, right? And right up there is talking ill about another individual, irregardless of whether it's true or not. We haven't talked, or he said this is about something false. And he continues, why? Someone who speaks lashon hara, someone who speaks slander about another individual, denies God's existence, and in the process kills 3 people. The person that's talking, the one that's listening, and the one whom which is being talked about. So there are many, many disasters. We can look at many stories. If you look at your own personal life, you can see probably instances where harmless idle chatter ultimately led to the destruction of families or relationships or workplace disasters because somebody was simply a little bit loose with their tongue. There's a very profound story that's told in the early 1800s in Europe. The Enlightenment period was just beginning, and with the Enlightenment period there was a lot of progressive movement even amongst the Jewish community. And the progressive movements in Judaism today all started at that time, in the early to mid 1800s. That was when people started to take a look at Yiddishkeit and maybe say, well, traditional Judaism isn't for us. But there was one rabbi in Romania, he was known as the Malbim. And this rabbi was a great, great scholar, statesman, very well respected by the community. But as they became more progressive and they saw him as being more traditional, a rift and a divide started to develop. And as much as he tried to reach out and stay connected with that community, many of them turned on him. How did they do that? They spoke slanderous. They would send him pork chops or shellfish for holiday gifts. And when he refused to accept those gifts, they would talk badly about him amongst other people and slowly tell people that he's a relic of ancient times, has no connection with modern society today, doesn't well respect the advance of society, until a word finally got back to the leader of Romania, the king of Romania, and he eventually was expelled from the country. He was told that either he would leave or he would be thrown out. All of this developed simply because someone spoke slanderous about another individual. Talking about one of the greatest rabbis of that 18th century. Gone. Many instances took place, just like this one, even in the Hasidic community, when Hasidic philosophy started to expand, and the rebbes, the rabbis that were leading the movement and developing the philosophy, tried to preach that every Jew is valuable and special and should be respected for who they are and what they contribute, irregardless of whether they are the most brightest individual or the simplest individual. That was not well respected by all the Jewish people, and there were many Jews, unfortunately, that gossiped to the government trying to have some of the rebbes imprisoned. The first rebbe in the Chabad community was actually sentenced to death because there were Jewish people that said that he was sending money to the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, which were enemies of the Russian state, when in fact he was simply sending money to Jews that were living in the land of Israel. It was Jewish people that told the government, after which he was arrested, and eventually, due to some miraculous events, he was exonerated and he was freed, and the day that he was freed is still celebrated as a holiday in the Chabad calendar. But all of these events came about because somebody was simply loose with their tongue. So without history, there is no shortage of examples of how powerful our words can be. And people always stop and they say, well, it's just words. It's just words. It's not like someone picked up a gun toward that individual or a hand or a fist or did anything about it. It's just words. How powerful could words be? What's the big deal? So I let something slip. So I said something. I hurt his feelings, maybe. But how bad can it truly be? But here we see quite clearly that it is a very, very powerful thing. There was once a man who was known for being the town gossip, the town yenta. And people think that yenta only applies to females, but we know today that is definitely not the case. Eventually, later in life, he realized the error of his ways. And he turned to the local leadership, the local rabbi, and said, I want to atone for what I've done. And he studied and he prayed and he really changed and refined his character. But at one point, he finally came into his rabbi and he says, I'm really working hard. And the rabbi looked at him and says, you have, but I don't think you yet fully grasp and understand how detrimental some of the things that you said were. So he told him, take a pillow, right, filled with feathers, take it in the street, rip open the pillow, and throw the feathers in the air. Now wait a couple minutes. And then collect all the feathers and bring them back here to me. And lo and behold, that's exactly what he did. And yet he couldn't gather all the feathers. The wind simply took them in so many random and different directions, it was impossible to gather them all up and bring them back to the rabbi. So finally defeated, he came to the rabbi and said, I just couldn't do it. I tried, but I could not do it. He says, now you understand what words are. Because the minute that we let them out, we lose control and they go off in directions we have no idea about. And we can never fully bring them back. That is why, even in our personal individual prayers, on a regular basis, when we say the Amidah, the highest part of the prayer, there's a little paragraph at the very end where we say, Lord, guard my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking guile. And to those who slander, let me give no heed. May my soul be humble and forgiving unto all. Because we recognize 3 times a day the power, the natural desire to A, speak gossip or hear it, and that other people will have that natural desire and inclination about me, and we seek to protect ourselves. So this is an ongoing issue. It affects our communities today the same way it affected Moses over 2,500 years ago.
A question's being asked, doesn't the Torah say we shouldn't talk about others? Doesn't the Torah say we shouldn't talk about others at all?
The Torah says that we should not talk about other individuals. Generally, yes. Unless, for whatever reason, it's something positive to benefit that individual. So the Torah basically tells us that we shouldn't talk idle, simply just chatting for no positive purpose whatsoever about somebody else. That's true. We shouldn't say gossip, something detrimental about another individual. So there's kind of 2 ideas here. But if you're talking about the positivity of another individual, help them get a job, help them meet a person, a match, whatever it be, the Torah has no problem with that. And so in fact, Maimonides goes into this very specifically in the laws of personal development, which is one of the reasons why the Rambam is such a wonderful, wonderful source for anyone that's looking to get a snapshot of the Torah, because Maimonides, in his seminal work, covers everything. Everything, from Shabbat to the holidays, to everything in between, to offerings in the temple, to laws that we don't practice today but only then, and even laws like personal development, to things that we should eat for dietetic purposes. Everything is covered in Maimonides' books. So what does he write about personal development in connection with what we say and how we speak? He says like this: who is a gossiper? One who collects information and then goes from person to person saying, this is what so-and-so said. This is what I heard about so-and-so. Even if the statements are true, they bring about destruction of the world. So here we're not necessarily talking about bad things, but we're just talking about idle talk. This is what this person said, this is what that person said. Whether it's true or not, simply talking idly and telling, it eventually brings about bad things if there's no positive and productive purpose involved in what you're saying. Then he goes on to say that there's an even more serious sin, and that is Lashon Hara, speaking evil or badly about another individual. One who speaks Lashon Hara, speaks badly about somebody else, it is as if that person is cutting themselves off from God. So we see now the second time where we say that speaking bad about another individual is a reflection of your faith in God. So it's not only about a personal thing, which I've heard. People will say, well, no, I'm a very religious person. I would never do anything against my faith, my Creator. But about the person sitting next to me, them I can schmooze about, I can talk about, so on and so forth. And the way they approach life, seeing their relationship with God independent of their relationship with their fellow, is hugely mistaken. So let's talk about what the motivation is. Because in order to try and combat this problem, to try and get ahead of it, and maybe curb it a little bit, we have to understand why is it that people have this natural desire to do this. And again, we're not talking about bad people. We're not talking about evil, nasty, mean-spirited people. We're talking about everyday guys just like me, because I face the same obstacle and the same issue sometimes. So why is it that a decent human being can do something equivalent to death, to killing someone? Where does this natural instinct come from? So here's what it says about the laws of leprosy. And in understanding the kinds of leprosy, we'll actually see a little bit more into why people seek to speak gossip. There are three terms that are used about leprosy. It says if a person will have on his skin a white patch forming a plague of leprosy, he has to be seen by the priests, the doctors. Once they establish that it's leprosy, he's sent out of the camps. What is a white spot? Well, someone tells you, I want to put on white paint on my walls. Right? Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Absolutely nothing. Because if you show up at Home Depot, do you know how many shades of white there are? There's this kind of white, and there's that kind of white.
Well, this was before crayons. This was when there was only 8 crayons. And there was only
but there's 3 different kinds of white.
Not in the simple 8-color box.
In this one, there's 3 different kinds of white. The Talmud goes into detail about what is a patch of white. And there are 3 different kinds of white. And the names are very, very telling as to the motivation for speaking slanderous. The first shade of white is called se'et, and that means clean wool. So wool white. Wool white is the first shade of white that can be seen in leprosy. The way you would see fresh wool before it's been dyed or touched in any way, that's one color. Color number 2 is called sapachat, and that actually is a color white that's still preserved today. It's eggshell white, but not the external shell, the membrane shell. So you know when you crack open a hard-boiled egg, you're trying to peel the peel off, then there's that thin, filmy layer that gets really annoying sometimes. That is another color of white called sapachat, the membrane. And then finally we have baheret, and that's the third one, and that is a spot as white as snow. Those are the 3 colors of white that you might see when examining a case of leprosy. And the funny thing is that because leprosy is such a rare condition, a lot of the researchers and people that treat it and look into it often look into the Bible, into the Torah, to understand different parts of it, because it's not a modern day thing. It's considered an ancient disease that's rarely afflicted people today. So if you look up in Wikipedia about leprosy, you'll see a lot of crossover between what medicine says and what the Torah says. It's actually really fascinating. But let's look at these 3 colors. The first word, se'et, that talks about wool white, the same word also means uplift. It means to uplift. Why does that have any significance? Because one of the reasons that people speak slanderous is to uplift themselves. I want to make myself greater, more elevated, more powerful, and therefore in order to do that, to make myself higher, I'm going to push you down. There's a very powerful story told about a Rebbe was playing with his brother, little children. They were playing with the brother, and the older brother told his younger brother, go stand in the pit. And the younger brother started to cry. So his father, the father of the Rebbe's, came out and said, why are you crying? He says, I'm crying because my older brother Zalman said I have to go stand in the pit. So the father turned to Zalman and says, why did you tell your brother to go in the pit? He says, well, I'm older, and therefore I wanted to be higher than my brother who's younger than me. He should look up to me. So I told him to go into the pit. So the Rebbe's father said, when you want to elevate yourself, get a chair or a stone and stand up on something higher. Never take another human being and push them lower in order to elevate yourself. But unfortunately, we don't always take that lesson to heart, and the easiest fashion to make ourselves higher is simply to push everyone down lower. And the minute that some kind of information comes to us that we can use to unlevel the playing field a little bit, we grab it and we put it in play. And just like that, that person is weaker, and because they're weaker, I am naturally stronger. The first reason why people often talk slanderous. The second one was sapachat. That is the eggshell white. The word sapachat means to attach, because that membrane is so closely attached to the egg. And that is the second motivation, peer pressure. When we are talking in a group and we're 33, 4 guys, and when somebody says something that's poking fun about the fifth person that's not sitting in our group, oh, look at that person, they don't know how to dress, or their house is in shambles, or what was that person thinking, showing up to the synagogue wearing a pink suit and different colors, whatever it might be. And what's our natural reaction? What's our natural instinct? I got to get in the action. I got to attach myself to what everybody else is doing. And if they're talking slanderous, well, I got to get something in there. I got to share my brilliance, my 2 cents too, so that I fit in with everybody else. So that way I'm loved and respected and cherished just like the other people. And that is one of the biggest reasons that people talk slanderous today. And you'll find yourself, even if you're a good person, even if you try not to talk badly about people, but you're amongst a group of people, and that's the direction of the conversation, it's very hard to say, you know what, guys, I'm sorry. Either you have to change the conversation or I have to leave. Because not only I can't talk slanderous, I can't even listen to it. I can't even be around in the presence of people that talk that way. Because frankly, I don't support it. I don't support this kind of behavior. I don't want to hurt someone. I know the extent of damage your words can cause. So I'm not going to be party to any of this. It's very hard for people to say that. And so naturally...
So silence isn't necessarily golden.
No, not in this case. Not in this case. Depends on the context. So reason number 2 is to attach to peer pressure and to conform to what the other group is doing. Reason number 3 is Baheret. Baheret means, we said, refers to the third level of the third color of white, which is snow white, but Baheret also means clarity. Why do we talk ill about people? Because we're so confident in our view. We're so confident in our perspective. Do you know why I told you, Herzl, that that person doesn't know how to dress? Because they really don't know how to dress. How do you know? Of course I know, because I know. Because I know. I know what the kind of clothes they wear. I know what their budget is. I know everything. And therefore, because I know everything, I'm very confident in my position. Whether it's hurtful, detrimental, or not, it's irrelevant. I know that this is the truth. Baheret. Clarity and confidence because we think we know. When in reality, we don't. We don't know what kind of extenuating circumstances there are. We don't know the background story. We don't know anything compared to the reality that we think we know. And so these 3 reasons are the major motivations, the prime motivations for why people seek to speak gossip. and ultimately why people are stricken with leprosy. That leprosy expresses itself in 3 shades of white, reflective of the 3 reasons why somebody might speak ill. There's a story about a very prominent sage, was truly a wise man, a smart individual. He once had an acquaintance come up to him and said, "I have to tell you this about one of your students." So he stopped him. He says, "You know what, before you tell me something about one of my students," and we don't know if it was good, bad, or anything. He just said, "I want to tell you about some of the students." Naturally, what would you say? "Sure, tell me." And then maybe you'd end up hearing some gossip. So therefore, this rabbi, before the guy would even talk, would say, "Stop! Do you think your words could pass my 3-filter check?" Guy says, "What's a 3-filter check?" He says, "I like to filter every piece of information about another individual through the 3 filters." He says, "Okay, what are the 3 filters?" He says, "Well, the first filter is, tell me if what you're about to say is absolutely true. Are you 100% positive that it's true?" Well, the guy started to think to himself. He says, it's information that I heard from someone. I think it might be true." He says, "But you're not sure it's true?" He says, "No, not really." He says, "Okay, that's filter 1. Filter number 2, is it something positive about that person?" He says, "Not really positive. Depends how you look at it." He says, "Oh, you can't really say it's good information." He says, "Not really." And the third filter, is it useful? Is the information you're about to share with me, is it useful? Is it something that we're going to use that'll be productive for me, for him, for everyone? He says, "No, not really, just some interesting information." He says, "Well then, in that case, you didn't pass any of the 3 filters, and I can't hear what you have to say." That's called taking slander seriously. Because taking slander seriously requires to make us a commitment not just about what we're going to say, but what we are going to listen to, what we're going to be privy to. And that's how every human being truly can change their surroundings. Because it's not just silence. It's not just me saying, "I'm not going to talk about something." But if you make it known, "I don't want to hear any information," what's going to happen naturally is that person that wanted to speak slanderous, they're not going to have anyone to talk to. We're going to weed them out. And if you have no one to share gossip with, then it's not gossip. You lose the interest to share the information, to develop that horrible character trait, if nobody wants to listen to that information. That's how you stop this problem. That's how you cure this epidemic, is not by talking only, but also by refraining from listening. There was a man named the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim was a rabbi that was known for one issue alone: talking slander. That was it. Every day, that's all he would talk about, is how bad it was to talk slanderous. And he became known throughout the entire world in the late part of the 18th century and early part of the 19th century, just based on this issue alone. Just based on this issue alone. He would simply get up and talk to people about not speaking slanderous. So now we understand how bad gossip can be. We know that apart from the fact that gossip can hurt people and so on and so forth, it's a reflection of who we are and ultimately expresses itself in biblical times, even with physical leprosy. We know where it comes from. We've understood a little bit about the motivations, the 3 motivations, whether it be raising ourselves up through putting someone else down, attaching ourselves to social pressures, to peer pressures, and trying to endear ourselves to a bad group of people by sharing bad information, or because we just know it's true. We're so confident in what we have to say. We see it so clearly. How can we not share it? But there's something deeper and even more negative about gossip. Something that really touches our very core as people, as Jewish people, as believers in God. And that's why you saw before how we touched upon that in saying that if someone speaks gossip, it essentially is a reflection of a lack of faith. Why is it so connected with our faith? So a human being is referred to in the Torah with many different names. There are different names to say man, and when we say man, I'm not meaning man as in man versus woman, but a human. Different names for that. There is Adam, there's Ish, Gever, and Enosh. All four different names all refer to the same thing. And there's many different Hasidic explanations to explain some of the minute differences and some of the character differences between the different terms. But those are four different terms that refer to four different levels. The highest level, the most elevated, profound state that a human being can be in, is Adam. That's the ultimate. When you say that a person was an Adam, that means that they were really connected as a human being. Why? The word Adam stems from the very first guy, Adam. Everybody knows Adam and Eve. Why was Adam named Adam? Because Adam le'elyon, he's compared a reflection to the above. It says that God created man in his image. So, therefore, he's a reflection of God. And that's what the word Adam means, a reflection of God, a mirror image of God. So therefore, when you say someone is Adam, is an Adam, you're saying he's at the ultimate level of a human being, where he's actually a reflection of God. So now that we understand some of these different terms, the question arises, why is it that when we talk about someone stricken with leprosy, which means someone that spoke slanderous, slander which is equal to killing, to illicit relationships, to idolatry, someone that spoke slander, and yet we use the term to refer to them, Adam. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why don't we use one of the less significant terms? Maybe we should say Ish or Enosh. Why would we use a term that refers to a man when he's ultimately connected? Someone that's committing one of the most gravest sins in the book. So, why it tells us and uses this terminology, Adam, comes back to the very core of the problem of speaking slanderous. And that is that today in society, we have a disconnect between our external self and our internal self. We have a disconnect. Many people today do what we call pay lip service in their relationships, in their faith, in a lot of the everyday things that they do. They simply are paying lip service. We know many marriages, many family relationships where people harbor hatred and ill feelings for years and years and years, and they simply say something, the right thing at the right time, and things just progress at the status quo. We live in a society today where people don't necessarily care about other people, where asking someone how they're doing on the phone is a formality, not a genuine interest into that person's well-being, to that person's situation, but rather simply a formality. In fact, when you go through the cashier, the checkout line at your supermarket, they ask you, how are you today, right? Or hello. And you respond to them, good, thank God, how are you doing? It's so strange and uncommon that it usually will catch the cashier off guard. Right? And the cashier is a nice person, and you can have a conversation with them, but it's so uncommon for someone to do that, that the cashier will actually do a double take. And I see this because this is something that I myself personally try to do every time. You see how rare it truly is. So an average person is walking the cashier's line and they see, how are you? it doesn't even register. Because the external and the internal have grown completely apart. It's a very dangerous thing. A very dangerous thing. Because if internally you are rotten, if you have issues on the inside, and you do not allow them to express themselves, you do not deal with them honestly and directly, eventually they will cause total destruction. And you will simply rot from the inside out. The only way that you can properly cure and take care of something wrong internally is to be open and honest about it. To confront it directly. There was once a man who had committed many, many sins. He just was not a good guy. And he really felt badly. But he didn't know where to start. He did not know where to start. So the guy shows up at the rabbi's office and turns to the rabbi and he says, "Rabbi, I have a friend. And this friend, he's done this and he's done that and he's done X, Y, and Z. Everything that you can imagine." The rabbi's listening. Wow, it's amazing. He says, "Well, my friend feels really badly about all these things that he's done. What should he do to correct it?" So Rabbi listened. This wasn't an average rabbi. We're talking about a big rabbi. Rabbi listened. He says, "Has your friend also done A, B, C, D, E, F, G?" And listed off a bunch of sins, a bunch of bad things that this guy had done that he hadn't included in his list. And when the man heard that, he turned to the rabbi and he says, "I guess you know that my friend is really me." And the rabbi says, "I know it, but do you?" Now, ask yourself this question. Why did the rabbi need to do that? Was he trying to shame and embarrass the guy? You know, the guy's trying to seek answers. Why does the rabbi have to put him on the spot like that? And the answer is because until this man came to terms with what he had done in a truly open and honest fashion, he was unable to cure himself and ultimately move on and turn a new leaf. You cannot take that next step until you fully reflect and recognize what you've done. And that means bringing it out and expressing it. And so today we are dealing with this issue where people do not fully express what is going on inside of them. And that's why today we don't see leprosy according to the Torah. You might ask yourself, "Hey, I haven't noticed too many people with leprosy." Maybe, Mendy, that means no one speaks slanderous anymore. There's no gossip in the world, right? You speak gossip, you get leprosy. No leprosy means no gossip. You don't think so?
I'm waiting to hear this one.
It's very simple. The Torah is saying that because of the disconnect that exists between the internal and the external, our gossip does not express itself externally. So biblical people were honest people. Good, bad, they made mistakes, but they were honest. When they made a mistake, they repented. They said, "We messed up." They seeked forgiveness. So when they had a problem, it naturally expressed itself right away. If someone spoke gossip, they got leprosy. They went to the Kohen, they had to get purified, they asked for forgiveness, move on. That's not what happens today. Today, it's all bottled up inside. Externally, we're model citizens. We're model citizens. We care about individuals. We care about animals. We care about everything. But behind closed doors, up in here, we're not the same people. And that's why today, what we feel inside doesn't always express itself. And it's not a positive thing, it's a negative thing. It's a negative thing because it makes it much harder for us when we make mistakes to come to terms with them, to face them, deal with them, and ultimately overcome them. Do you understand?
I'm waiting for the, what do we call Adam and
Yeah, we didn't answer that one yet.
Okay.
But you understand this concept. For me, actually, this was one of the most profound concepts. Because it's not just leprosy. It's anything.
We're just have values that we say we have, but we don't apply and we don't adhere to.
No, and honesty and openness to deal with our deficiencies is the biggest deficiency. Because if you're honest and you're open and you're confident to have that conversation with yourself, then you can make the biggest mistakes, but you can still succeed and grow and progress. And that was the Jewish people in in biblical times. Because when you look at the mistakes they made catastrophic mistakes. They made huge mistakes. But at the same time, they constantly grew and they progressed. They were honest and they were open and they dealt with what they did. And that's why we have these examples in the Torah for real people like ourselves. So we have to get the message and get real and be honest. Have that conversation with yourself. You do have deficiencies. You're not perfect. You've made mistakes. It's time to bring that out into the open and deal with it. And the fact that we don't is the reason that we don't see leprosy on our skin today. So, why is it that we refer to a man who's ultimately contracting psoriasis, contracting leprosy, as Adam, the highest level of a human being? Because if you contract leprosy when you speak slander, that means that you are internally and externally in sync. It means that when you have a problem internally, when you make a spiritual mistake, because your spiritual life and your physical life are like this, the minute you make a spiritual mistake, it expresses itself in your physical body. And that's why, even though a man contracted leprosy, which meant that he had made a grave mistake, he was still referred to as an Adam, a human being that had ultimate connection because his spiritual life and physical life were in sync, were in tandem. He made a terrible mistake, but it expressed itself. He dealt with it. He got purified. He refrained from doing it in the future, and he continued to grow and to progress. Whereas people today are making mistakes constantly, but because their spiritual life and their physical life are completely separate, you're never seeing and they're never dealing with any of those issues.
So from a strictly biblical standpoint, if there was a large outbreak of leprosy, we'd actually be better off than we were.
Today? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we have to be honest, people are speaking gossip. So if people are speaking gossip and they're not getting leprosy, that means there's a disconnect. And this is not a tough concept to understand. There is a huge disconnect. We live in a politically correct society. Those two words there sum up everything we've just said. What does it mean politically correct? It doesn't mean you're saying the right thing, right?
You're saying the right thing.
Because then we would just say, oh, they said the right thing. No, but we don't say it. We said they said the politically correct thing.
What's accepted by society today.
Right there, we see a division.
Without pissing everyone off.
Exactly. We see a divide right there. That's the divide. So it's not about whether what I feel or what I think or what I say is right or wrong. It's whether society, pop culture, thinks that it's right or wrong. That's it. That's the problem. That's the internal and external divvying from each other. You can call it internal, external, spiritual life, physical life, whatever terms you want to use it. But there is a huge disconnect in society today. And our job is to fuse those two worlds together, bring it back together. Because without bringing it back together, you cannot accomplish pretty much anything in this world. This world is all about transformation and elevation, so you have to fuse in order to do that. One of the most profound cases of gossip was the blood libel. The blood libel, which actually started years and years ago. It started in 1144 in England, in Norwich, England. It was the first time that the church accused a Jewish person of killing someone for their blood for Passover. That was the first time. But when the blood libel really came to a height was with Mendel Bayless. Mendel Bayless was a Jewish man who worked in a factory. This was at the end of the 18th century, just about 1900. He was a Jewish man that worked at a factory, and just around the corner from the factory, a few weeks before Passover, a young boy disappeared. It's a 13-year-old Ukrainian boy. He disappeared, and eventually he was found dead. And at that point, they accused Mendel Bayless, this Jewish guy at the factory, of killing this boy in order for his blood for Passover. And the man was arrested. He was arrested and he was held for 2 years in jail before he even had a trial. As he was held, eventually this issue became more than just a local issue. It became an opportunity for huge anti-Semitic rallies and rants, and this was in 1911. So we're talking about 20 years before Nazism really hits the world. But this is kind of the prelude to what the world was going to see later. And this was a huge, and the same thing was in the response. The Jewish world band together. There was public fast days and prayer days, all for Mr. Bayless, who was sitting in jail. And the rabbis understood that this case that was being presented was not just a case against Mendel Bayless, but rather a case against the Jewish people, against Jewish philosophy and Jewish ideology. So the defense team, which was led by Oscar Grusenberg, who was one of the most prominent lawyers in all of Russia, was a Jewish guy. He was leading the defense team. He had a rabbinic advisory team whose job was just to field the questions and issues that would be placed and directed towards Judaism. So they prepared themselves quite extensively, and in fact, when the trial did finally open up, they asked many, many questions on different passages that are recited in the Talmud. And finally, there was one passage that came that proved what they believe was truly problematic. It says in the Talmud, Rabbi Shimon said, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, actually the guy that passed away on Lag BaOmer, which we celebrate in 2 weeks, he said that the Jewish people are called Adam, and all the nations of the world are not called Adam. So the prosecutor got up and said, this is the proof. What does Adam mean? A man, a human being. Jewish people believe that they are human, and everyone else that's not Jewish is subhuman, less than human. The biggest proof that the life of someone that's not Jewish is not significant, and therefore it's not a big deal for them to take this 14-year-old boy's life. And it truly caused a major uproar. And one of the rabbinic advisors, Rabbi Meir Shapiro, who was the rabbi of Lublin and went on to become one of the most profound figures of that time, he actually instituted Daf Yomi, which is where people study one page of Talmud every day and finish the entire thing in roughly 4 years or so. He explained something very unique. The term Adam can mean two things. It can mean a human being, or it can mean a human body. The Jewish people are not just human beings, they are also a human body. A body, one entity. See, in fact, you look at all of those other terms for man, none of them, they can all be said in the plural form. You could say the word ish in the plural form, you could say the word gever in the plural form, enosh in the plural form, but the word Adam, there's no plural form for it. It's singular. And therefore, this verse is telling us that the Jewish people are one body. You can't necessarily say that about all the other nations of the world. An Italian is an Italian, and a Russian is a Russian, and someone that's Hispanic is Hispanic, someone that's Muslim is Muslim, and so on and so forth. And all the different divisions that exist in the world. But the Jewish people are one collective unit. And that is why they're referred to in the way Adam that none of the other nations can be referred to. And Rabbi Shapiro looked and he turned and he said, if someone was killed in Italy, would the entire Italian people be up in roars? No, probably not. Maybe for a week or two, but then it would just go back to regular life. But here in this issue, one person has been accused and the entire community, country, the entire known world has rallied for him or against him, depending on whether they are part of this Jewish body or not. That's another definition of the term Adam. And that definition emphasizes how detrimental, how powerful it is when we speak slanderous against another one of our brethren, which is something we do time and time again. We are taking part of our body and we are in effect cutting it off. We are hurting ourselves. That's what it comes down to. We are a single organism. And a single organism operates in unity. And when you speak slanderous or detrimental about somebody else, you can have an argument. You can have a disagreement. But when you speak negatively about another human being, you are cutting off a piece of your body, hurting one of your very own limbs. And that's why it's a reflection of your faith in God. Because God created every human being in this world. God created the Jewish people as one collective body, chose them for a unique and special task, and you have the audacity to talk negatively about that person. If you walk over to Jack and you start telling Jack that John's children are just downright bad, you are disrespecting not only John's children, but John as well. You're disrespecting John. Say too, we are children of God, and therefore talking negatively about one of us is, in fact, a reflection of your faith, or lack thereof. That is the thought process that we have to take every single time we go to open our mouth, or we listen to someone else open theirs. It's not just something I heard on the street. It's either positive, negative, productive, or idle chatter. And if it's the latter, it has no place in our conversation. So, hopefully we're going to walk away from tonight's discussion and understand that our words are very powerful. They can build bridges, they can burn them. They can lift people up, they can make people, and they can destroy them. And yes, there are natural tendencies to talk slanderous about other people. There are easy pitfalls to fall into it, even when we're not doing the talking. It's so easy to just sit there and listen. Don't fool yourself. Don't fool yourself for a moment in thinking that you're not doing anything, because you are. You're encouraging this behavior, and by doing that, you're hurting yourself. Because your success is their success. And their failure will ultimately be your failure as well. But if we take the opposite approach, if we seek to enhance the people around us, to build them up, to give them more confidence, to bless them and put them in a position for success, their success will be our success. The better they do, we will do better as well. That's how you look at one collective body. You don't sacrifice the health of one arm for the health of the other arm. If this arm is hurting, we don't cut it off. We bandage it. We heal it so that ultimately the right hand will be more successful because the left hand is healthy as well. That's tonight's discussion. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and you are cured from speaking slander and gossip, which we're not going to talk about anymore. We're only going to talk about positive things now. Next week's discussion is my life or yours. We'll talk about between being selfless and self-preserving. What is the balance that one must have between looking out for our own interests and the interests of others? As always, feel free to email any and all questions to askmendy, askmendy, @gmail.com. This Wednesday night, we will start the JLI's third course for this year, The Art of Marriage. A great course, whether you are thinking about marriage, married, or post-marriage. Strongly encourage you to at least attend the first session on Wednesday and see if it's something that's right for you. Yes, in one night, I will enhance your relationships. So I hope to see you Wednesday night. We have 2 events coming up in the next month. The first event, which is our barbecue in honor of Lag BaOmer, will be held Wednesday, May 9th at 7:30 p.m. here at our home, the Lag BaOmer barbecue. And then Shavuot, celebrating the giving of the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai with our wonderful cheesecake party, is May 27th. Mark those dates down in your calendar. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining us. Good night.